Welcome to Quality in Distance Education. A triple perspective. This documentary will discuss the issues of teacher-student relationships and feedback as they relate to the quality of distance education. You will hear perspectives from faculty members, distant ed students, and administrators. The interface that was designed for this documentary will provide two viewing options. One, you may use the navigation buttons on the left side of the screen to link you to specific sections of the video. Or, by selecting the Complete Video button, you will be able to view the documentary in its entirety. This presentation was designed and developed for a 1024 by 768 resolution. By pressing the F11 key, you'll be able to eliminate the browser navigation button and menu and enhance your overall viewing experience.
I do three things to get to know my students. The first thing I do is I go through the course before the term starts, doing what I call a walkthrough, wearing their shoes. The second thing is I worry and take care to very much into account communication throughout the term. And the third one would be feedback. The walk through the learner shoes is that prior to the beginning of the term, I go through the course website and walk through all the activities and ask myself the question, do students know when and how to contact me? Do they have all the information they need to succeed in the course? And based on that, I make changes prior to the beginning of the term. Once the term begins, at the beginning of the term, I encourage students schedule during the first 2 weeks a chat. And during that chat, I answer questions. It's informally mostly, no lecturing or anything. We just sit down and chat online about, and they ask questions, how much work is it going to be, etc. And I answer or try to answer all their questions. In those courses in which I have hybrid students, meaning I have students sitting in the class and other students taking the class at a distance, I schedule a phone conversation with each one of them. That phone conversation, also taking place during the first 2 weeks, is to get to know my student or answer firsthand the questions they have and allow them to feel a little bit part of the class. And the third part of the communication is that throughout the course I encourage student-to-student interaction. That would be team groups. Team projects are huge in my courses. Another aspect is encouraging student-to-student participation through a bulletin board, electronic peer assistance. And also student-to-faculty interaction. Throughout the term, I make sure that they know that I'm there to help them. Finally, I would mention feedback. That's how I get to know my students, by reading their assignments, by grading their assignments. As boring as some people might think assigning grades is, it's marvelous to see how you read their assignments and say, well, the message is really getting out or not, and make changes accordingly. So in summary, those are pretty much the three approaches I follow to get to know my students. Number one, I try to pretend I'm them before the course starts. I open the lines of communication any way I can during the term, and constant presence. I'm always there. And then finally, feedback. I read what they think, what they have learned, and by reading their assignments, learn a little bit more about them and about myself.
The process of developing a relationship with a student in a distance educational environment, I've always argued, is key to the success of that student. There are three techniques that I use when conducting distance education courses that I've used in the past that have been very effective and allowed me to develop such relationships. The first is a telephone conversation at the beginning of the semester. It's a very informal conversation. It's a get to know you conversation. And the things that I try to focus in on is their expectations of a distance education environment. If there is a traditional form of that course available, why did they choose the distance education environment? And try to understand their expectations and their perceptions of the environment. If they've taken distance education courses in the past, I will get into their likes and dislikes. What were the things they liked? What were the things that really went well for them? And what were the things that didn't go so well and they didn't like? And I will jot down those things and, where applicable, and if it's possible, incorporate the things they liked and try to avoid those things, if it's possible, of the things they didn't like. And so, again, that kind of begins the process of building that relationship. The second technique that I use is each student is responsible for moderating a chat session. They're responsible for the topic, presenting the content, co-navigating the internet to present their topic and content. And in the background, I serve as a coach. And that coaching process is nothing more of, if they want my input, I'll assist them in whatever way they feel is necessary. But what that does is it allows them to use the technology that's being used on them, if you will, for their learning process. And so they get to see maybe what a professor would go through when using the technology and presenting content. And I think that's key because they understand now both sides, the student and the professors. And so that kind of bridges the relationship between the student and myself. The last technique, and it's not so much of a technique as it is a line of communication, is key. I provide an email address, a telephone number, and I also provide my cellular telephone number as well. And in particularly, the cellular telephone in recent years has become more popular, but not so much from calling, although I do have some students that will call me on the cellular phone. What's key about the cellular phone, is the ability to text message. I have a lot of students that will text message me. And what that does is it creates an instant, reach out to the professor, if you will. And it does, to the extent for each student, kind of close that distance between the student and myself, and allows them to communicate with me. Now, if I'm not available, I usually have canned responses built in my phone that I will send them back saying I'm not available. However, it's important for them to understand that in that instant where they tried to send me a text message and reach out to me, it's important for them to get an immediate response. And I do that. It's an immediate response that says, I'm not available now, but I will get back to you as soon as possible. Or if I know when my availability or when my next availability is, I will let them know at what point I will be in contact with them. But the line of communication, whether it's email, phone, or the use of text messaging, I think are key, because it allows you to build that solid relationship and students don't feel isolated. That sometimes that isolation that sometimes takes place when students take distance education courses. So those three techniques, really: the telephone conversation, which is very informal, I get to know you, likes, dislikes, expectations, and perceptions of the distance education environment; the use of the technology and moderating a chat session themselves, allowing them to use the technology and kind of face the challenges that a professor has when presenting content and teaching in a distance education environment. And then, of course, lastly, the line of communication, which again plays such an important role in closing that distance between the student and myself. So those are three techniques that I've used that have been very effective, and they've allowed me to build relationships with my students.
My name is Noteh Glogauer, and I'm an online student at Nova Southeastern Doctorate Program. Online professors do many things to help their students be successful. It's extremely important for online professors to support the needs of the learners, and there are a variety of ways that differ from a traditional classroom setting. Online learning environments incorporate appropriate use of a variety of media. These various media meet the individual learning styles of the students that make up the classroom. Online learning experiences support interaction and development of communities of interest. These students that make up the virtual classroom are usually like-minded, motivated professionals who have similar goals. Experiences themselves have a clear purpose with tightly focused outcomes and objectives. The faculty themselves are prepared to meet the special requirements of the online learning population. There's an innate recognition that learners have unique skill sets and academic demands. Online students are informed academically, and they themselves, the consumers, are fully aware of what it needs to be able to be motivated for success. These students understand the course requirements and are prepared to succeed. They're prepared to develop a close personal interaction with the professors, who they themselves have a high desire to be able to foster this relationship. Online programs maintain a workable class size. By definition, they encourage regular contact between students and faculty. Students are advised about course details and the syllabus, with opportunities to communicate with the professor before the actual course begins. This communication pathway is an ensurer of success. Online format within the classroom program provides direct outlet for developing interaction. Students are provided with supplemental course information that outlines course objectives, concepts, and ideas. Learning outcomes for each course are summarized in a clearly written, straightforward document. Faculty and students agree upon expectations regarding times for student assignment completion and faculty response mechanisms and protocols. This upfront communication is one of the extreme ways to be able to ensure student success in an online program, which differs than a traditional classroom face-to-face setting.
Hi, I'm Diane Hobson. As a distance education student at Nova Southeastern University, I have learned that in distance education, there are times when online instructors must do things a little differently than a traditional classroom teacher to make the course successful and to provide the students with quality education. The first thing online instructors should do is to provide the students with clear objectives and a detailed syllabus. Students need to know what is expected of them and what they should be learning at the very beginning of a course. Students also need to know the timeline of when things will happen and when assignments are due. Students should also be told how assignments will be graded, as well as be provided grading rubrics for any projects, assignments, or assessments. Because the instructor is not physically there to tell the students all the needed details, the instructor should have a detailed syllabus posted on the web so students can easily access it in case they would have any questions. Some instructors have put this type of information not only in printed form, but also in audio or video form so students with different learning styles can choose the way they want to access this type of information. Instructors should also provide students with a forum so students can ask questions, and instructors should respond to those questions in a timely manner so students do not become frustrated. Students should feel that they can contact the instructor if problems do arise. Of course, it's not only the responsibility of the instructor to make a successful online classroom. The student also has a big responsibility. The student should be self-motivated and be committed to reading the syllabus very carefully. The student should be aware of any upcoming due dates and set aside the appropriate amount of time before the assignment is due to ensure that the student has enough time to successfully complete the assignment by the given due date. The student should always strive to produce the best work possible and never settle for mediocrity. It is the student's responsibility to ask questions if things are not clear. In distance education, the student cannot be a passive learner. The student must be curious and take part in activities and in the entire learning process. By making a few changes from the traditional teaching and learning classroom, instructors and students can find success in the online classroom, and students can receive a quality education.
Feedback also shows, or providing feedback also shows how much respect the instructor has for the student's work, whether or not the professor is paying attention or reading the assignment. If you have a sense as a student that your instructor is not reading your assignments, maybe you're not going to be that motivated to do a better job because no one's going to be there, there's no audience. And we should know as instructors that that is very important. The audience, what the students think, or how the students learn. So I would say yes, feedback is number one priority.
Now, the idea of feedback in a distance education environment, I would argue that's probably the most important piece, or one of the most important piece of the process in distance education, and ensuring that the participants or the students are learning and really have a sense of that someone's watching them and someone's facilitating them and someone's coaching them through the online experience. As I stated before in the earlier question, I make sure that I have a set number of interactions with them, whether I use email, whether it's a phone conversation, or whether it's the text messaging that may go back and forth. I try to use those different types of technologies to ensure that the student is aware that I'm there. I often say to people that feedback is the tool that you use to close the distance in distance education. It provides a mechanism that those students that may feel isolated in a distance education course realize that the professor is no further than a text message away, or a telephone call, or even an email. And I think that in the courses that I've taught so far online, these techniques of making sure that I have a minimum amount of feedback sessions, and one of the things that I also do in those feedback sessions is there are certain number of feedback sessions that I require, and they get points for participating in the feedback session. So if a student, let's say a student does their moderation of a chat session and co-navigation, within 2 or 3 days after that session, they will have a telephone call with me, and it usually takes about 15 minutes, 20 minutes, sometimes more, sometimes less, depending on the student. And we talk about what they did well. We emphasize what they did well. We talk about the things that went right and the effectiveness of how they use the technology and how they controlled the conversation within the chat. But on the other side of that, we also talk about the things they didn't do so well. And in that feedback, I'm very critical, and I tell them up front I'm going to be critical. But in a way, what it does is it creates that relationship. Now, if I've done a good job in creating that relationship, the feedback is received well. And for the most part, I would argue that most of the feedback sessions I have with my students go well. But there is no doubt in my mind that feedback session is key, and it does close that distance in distance education, and it really does allow the students to feel that while they may not see me face to face, it's no more than a laptop, a cellular phone, or a landline phone. That's really the distance between them and wherever I may be, regardless whether I'm at home or I'm traveling abroad, whatever the case may be. That's really the longest distance is their access to one of those types of technology. So indeed, I would argue that feedback is one of those top priorities as a professor, to ensure that they take place, and they take place on a consistent basis between the professor and the student, to ensure that each student succeeds and meets the educational objectives of the courses.
Feedback is an extremely important component in an online learning program. There are many characteristics which make up good feedback. Prompt feedback facilitates reciprocity and cooperation among students. Constructive personal feedback is extremely important, and it develops the relationship between student and instructor. There are a variety of methods of feedback that are incorporated in an online learning program, such as email, an interactive courseware, instant messaging, and video. Learning effectiveness is the opportunity where the provider demonstrates that the quality of learning online is comparable to the quality of its traditional programs. This opportunity is facilitated through the ongoing interaction between student and professor and the feedback that results. All learners who wish to learn online have the opportunity and can achieve success through the ongoing support from instructors. Student interaction with faculty and other students is an essential characteristic and is facilitated in a variety of ways, including voicemail and/or email. And of course, even in an online program, opportunities such as regular telephone as well as regular snail mail also comprise opportunities for feedback. Throughout the duration of the course and program, students have access to technical assistance, including detailed instructions regarding the electronic media used, practice sessions during the beginning of the course, and convenient access to technical support staff. These opportunities are also included in the different aspects of communication and feedback, both from the professor and the other supportive components to an online program. This feedback is essential to a successful opportunity for learning for the online student.
The dynamics of interaction among students and instructors in a traditional classroom can be very different than the dynamics that occur between students and instructors in a distance education course because of the physical distance that separates them. Feedback is extremely important in distance education. In traditional classrooms, there's often spontaneous verbal and nonverbal feedback between the students and instructor, as well as scripted feedback such as comments written on an assignment, as well as opportunity to discuss the feedback in class or during office hours. To have quality in distance education, the online course must be designed and organized in a way that allows the instructor to provide clear and timely feedback. Guidelines should be set as to how much feedback to expect and when to expect it from instructors, as well as how much feedback students are expected to be contributing. Feedback from the instructor should support learning and be specific and responsive to the students' learning activities. It should inform the students of the correctness and completeness of their learning activities. Both the student and the instructor should initiate feedback. Online instructors need to receive feedback from their students so they can work to incorporate any changes that might be needed to improve the distance education classes. For feedback to be useful for instructors, the instructor must be willing to take action based on feedback from students, and students must understand why the instructor is asking for feedback. In distance education, the lack of timely feedback can result in students being unsure of what is expected of them and can contribute to frustration. The lack of feedback can also lead to perceptions of alienation and isolation in distance education. To provide quality in distance education courses, timely feedback is essential.
In regard to scanning the external environment for changes that influence distance learning, it's extremely important to actively engage that dynamic. Tendency in the industry is to be somewhat passive and to accept the changes that are coming about, and they tend then in education to be non-academically driven and more technology driven. From my vantage point strategically, I like to scan actively the technology, also the academic engagement with the technology, so I can get a sense of what's out there, what is working, what isn't, but then to put a value add on top of that that makes sense, that is rational to the in-class experience. Looking at it mostly from the perspective of the student, the faculty, certainly the usability is important, but the outcomes that the students experience are extremely important. And the not just for the reason that the students are paying the bills, but we are in the business of educating students. And one of the things, the promises that we at Franklin Pierce have made is that we have as a goal to have technology mediated or distance mediated instruction be equal to or better than the in-class experience, given the richness of the context of the pedagogical possibilities with technology and enhanced education. And so the external environment as well as the internal innovation come together in a way that really focus on student outcomes. Thanks. As to looking at our crystal ball here for where instructional design and online education meets in 10 years, we have tremendous technological possibilities. And one of the things that, you know, as we look 10 years out, it's quite instructive to look 10 years back to see where we were then versus where we are today. And one sees the telescoping that takes place as technologies increasingly accelerate innovation. But innovation in and of itself on a technological basis doesn't necessarily do well for students. And so when we look out 10 years out, given the lessons of the last 10 years, you know, obviously pipeline is going to be there. It's going to change everything. Just-in-time education, as it would, where one can access real live lectures very easily over very solid bandwidth. All of that is in play, but one really needs to step outside of this box that it tends to become a self-fulfilling prophecy in terms of where we would like to see it go, given the limitations of the technology that we have today. But I like to step outside of that and step into a what-if world. What if, as we look at some of the cutting-edge thinking out there, what if we could create the classroom of the future that would be very different from what we experience today? And one of the things that I see coming forward very aggressively is this virtual classroom, and virtual in terms of a 3D experience. We see virtual communities out there today. It started out as text-based, and it's gone to digital audio and also digital video and images and so on. But to bring that into more of a synchronous kind of experience where people adopt certain persona, can take part in a classroom with a world-class teacher from all over the world. We have communities like Second Life out of California, I believe they are, where over $200 million of sales are taking place. Right now it's very much a marketing site. But they are creating whole new communities that virtually interact with each other. And one could see this as having a merger with the more passive engagement that we see in asynchronous education, as well as chats that don't involve video and audio. So I would see, as we go forward, a push, a demand from students to have that virtual experience where they can actively engage, almost in a tactile way, the educational experience.
Well, let's see. Currently, the Harvard Extension School is sponsoring 600 courses, and of those 600 courses, 100 of them are online. And I would imagine that in the future, looking 5 to 10 years out, I would say it's highly likely, at least I would like to see more than half of them have an online option. In fact, I'd like for it to become such a normal part of our business that when a teacher basically applies to offer a course for us, there's just a little checkbox that they can put onto the application form saying that the course should be live online or post-produced online for distant audiences. The other area of growth that's going to be very important for us is having daytime Harvard College FAS courses being offered through our distance education program, because that's the one feature that makes us distinctive. We're able to tap into some of the most brilliant minds at Harvard who ordinarily would be too busy to teach for us. One of the scarcest resources at this university is faculty time, and currently we have 25 of our 100 courses offered during the daytime by people in all fields, from world expert in Shakespeare to people in computer science to folks in the social sciences as well, including the dean of the graduate school is currently involved teaching for us. Ordinarily, these people would never be available. Finally, I also want to see our setting up something like something equivalent to the Bach Center, but maybe it would be called the E-Bach Center. The Bach Center at Harvard is concerned with traditional face-to-face chalk talk types of teaching and the training of teaching fellows to enable that to be done better. In the online world, we haven't really come to grips with how to most effectively teach a distant audience. So very often we hire teaching fellows at the last minute. We tell them to go teach a section line. We offer them ideas about tools that are available, such as, from email to chat boards to discussion boards to, other familiar sorts of techniques and tools. But we don't really train them about the pedagogy and how to most effectively teach to an online audience. So I would like to have a sort of a part of our organization that is capable of quickly bringing people up to speed, but also doing some basic research on the most effective ways of conducting a class in this sort of cyberspace world. So maybe in 5 years, I would say perhaps half of our courses would be online, and some number of them would be done in a way that, in fact, even transforms the daytime course itself. So to give you an example, a course such as Michael Sandel's Justice, which teaches Western notions of justice, might invite large groups of students from perhaps some English-speaking part of the world, perhaps India or Israel or someplace like that, and bring them into the class to see if our Western notions of justice really jive with their culture, and perhaps in so bringing them into the participatory discussion, the course that's being offered in front of the live audience becomes transformed in a meaningful way. This is also something we did with a professor of government, where the course was about U.S.-European relations, and we brought in an audience from Sciences Po in Paris. And for the Harvard students, there was something very authentic about discussing European relations by talking to Europeans and asking for their opinions, and the discussions were much more informed by bringing in those distance audiences. So I would like to see more collaboration being done over time with people in other places.
As you have seen in this documentary, teacher-student relationship and ongoing feedback are two critical components in the successful delivery of quality in distance education. Faculty, students, and administrators have presented their perspectives and techniques as they relate to these two topics. In addition, you have heard from two administrators as they present their idea and predictions about the future in distance education. We hope you've enjoyed this production of Quality in Distance Education, a Triple Perspective. This has been a video production of F4 Incorporated, presented by Elias Garcell, Maria Garcia, Noteh Glogauer, and Diane Hobson.